I didn't realize someone had been editing my work behind my back until my manager read my own report out loud, and it sounded like I'd written it in my sleep. I'm a guy in my early 30s, mid-level analyst on an IT adjacent team at a mid-sized company that sells software to hospitals. Not glamorous. Mostly spreadsheets, dashboards, and translating the system is on fire into something leadership can understand without panicking. I'm not the loudest person in the room, and I'm not the guy who plays office politics for fun. I'm the guy who fixes the numbers, documents everything, and goes home. That's important, because what happened only makes sense if you understand the environment. Shared drives, shared templates, too many quick tweaks, and a culture where if something goes wrong, whoever touched it last gets blamed. We had a quarterly performance review cycle coming up, and I was already on thin ice for one thing. I'm slow to trust. I double check. I ask for things in writing. Management calls that not being agile. The project that started all this was a revenue impact report for a client renewal. The client was big enough that everyone knew the name, and losing them would mean layoffs. Our VP wanted a clean story: uptime stats, ticket resolution time, root cause summaries, and improvements delivered. My job was to build the final deck numbers from raw exports, JIRA data, monitoring logs, and an internal billing database. It wasn't hard, but it was exacting. One wrong percentage and you don't just look sloppy, you look like you're lying. I built everything in an Excel file on a SharePoint-backed folder because that's how my team worked. One source of truth, one file. Everyone can collaborate. I hate that setup because everyone can collaborate also means everyone can wreck it. But my manager insisted. Transparency, he called it. No bottlenecks. My coworker, let's call her Dana, was my counterpart on the narrative side. She wasn't IT, exactly. More like project management wearing a data hat. Dana had been here longer than me, knew everyone's birthdays, and somehow always ended up sitting next to the director at lunch. She had that effortless confidence that makes people assume she's competent, even when she's wrong. And she was wrong a lot, just loudly and with a smile. For the first week, things were normal. I pulled the data, cleaned it, built pivot tables, and added a tab with explanations so no one could misread the metrics. Every night before I logged off, I saved, closed the file, and left a note in the Teams chat. Updated uptime section, please don't edit formulas, use the input cells. That wasn't me being controlling. That was me trying to prevent chaos. Dana would respond with the same kind of corporate cheer, "Got it, you're the best," and then later, she'd ask questions that told me she hadn't read a single note. Like, "Can you just make the uptime 99.99? Not, "What is it?" but "Make it." I'd answer carefully, "It is what it is based on monitoring. We can show improvement over last quarter." She'd say, "Perfect," and I'd think that was the end of it. On the Thursday before the deadline, I did my normal final check. Numbers looked right. Charts matched the tables. I exported the deck slides, saved them in the same folder, and flagged the manager. "Ready for review. All sources referenced on tab 8. He replied with a thumbs up. Friday morning, I walked into the conference room with coffee and that cautious optimism you get when you've done your job and you're just hoping nobody else ruins it. My manager had the deck up on the screen. Dana was there early, sitting close to him, laptop open, smiling like she'd already won something. The meeting started fine. Leadership nodded through the first few slides. Then we hit the section I cared about: ticket resolution time, mean time to recovery, incident count. My manager read the headline number out loud to the VP. Average ticket resolution increased by 18%, he said. I blinked, because that was the opposite of what I had calculated. We were supposed to be down. Improvement. That was the whole point. He continued, an incident count spiked in the last month, which suggests... I cut in before I could stop myself. Not loud, but fast. That's not right. Every head turned. The VP's face did that thing executives do where they don't show anger yet, just disappointment, like you've wasted their time. My manager frowned at me. "This is from your spreadsheet." "It can't be," I said, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. The trend was down. I checked it last night. Dana gave a tiny laugh, barely audible, but enough. The kind of laugh that says, "Oh, this again." My manager clicked out of the deck, opened the spreadsheet in the shared folder, and said, "Show us." He went straight to the tab. The numbers were there in black and white. Worst performance, reverse trend, an ugly red percentage that made it look like we'd been failing the client for months. The chart even had the right formatting, my formatting. But the values were wrong in a way that wasn't random. It was clean, coherent, damning. The VP leaned back. "So," he said slowly, "we're presenting the client that we got worse." My manager looked at me like I'd set him up. "Did you validate this?" "I did," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I validated it yesterday. Something is off." Dana's smile faded into concern, performative concern. "Maybe you pulled the wrong export," she offered like she was helping. "It happens. We're all under pressure." That was the moment I understood the real danger. Nobody in that room wanted a mystery. They wanted a culprit. And right then, the simplest story was, I messed up. I was the numbers guy. Therefore, the numbers were my fault. My manager closed his laptop a little harder than necessary. "We'll pause this section," he said, forcing calm. "After the meeting, you and Dana stay. We need to figure out what you did." He didn't say what happened. He said what you did. I sat there through the rest of the meeting, barely hearing anything, watching Dana nod along like a teammate, while my career quietly started to tip over. I didn't know yet how the file had changed. I just knew one thing with absolute clarity. Those weren't my numbers, and if I couldn't prove it, I was done. They asked me to stay after the meeting, but Dana stayed too, and that told me everything. My manager closed the conference room door and didn't sit down. That's never a good sign. He stood with his arms crossed, looking at the spreadsheet on his laptop like it had personally betrayed him. "Walk me through your process," he said. Not angry. Worse. Controlled. I explained it the same way I always did. Raw exports, timestamp filters, pivot tables pulling from locked ranges. I even mentioned the validation checks I'd built in, cross totals that would break if the inputs were wrong. As I talked, I could hear how defensive I sounded, even though I was describing normal, careful work. Donna leaned back in her chair, arms folded, watching me like a judge watches a defendant who's talking too much. When I finished, my manager turned the laptop so we could all see the formulas. "These cells reference a different range," he said. "See? That's why the numbers flipped." "I didn't change that," I said immediately. Dana tilted her head. "The file's shared," she said gently. "We've all been in there." That word, all, landed wrong. I'd been explicit repeatedly about not touching formulas. Everyone knew that, or pretended to. My manager exhaled through his nose. "Look, I don't care who touched what," he said. "What I care about is that we almost walked into a client call with bad data. That can't happen." "Almost?" As if that made it better. "I can pull the original exports," I said. "I can rebuild it and show—" "We don't have time," he cut in. "The deck goes out Monday. Fix it." Dana nodded. "I can help," she said quickly. "I'll double-check everything this time." This time. The meeting ended with no apology. No acknowledgement that something strange had happened. Just an unspoken warning hanging in the air. As I walked back to my desk, I could feel eyes on me. Not curious, but cautious. Like people do when they're deciding how close they want to stand to someone who might be radioactive. That afternoon, an email hit my inbox from my manager, short, clinical. "Given recent concerns about data accuracy, please ensure all future deliverables are reviewed by Dana prior to submission." Read that again. My work now needed her approval. That was the moment irritation hardened into something colder. Because this wasn't about a mistake anymore. This was about control. I opened the spreadsheet again and started combing through it, line by line. The changes weren't sloppy. They were deliberate. Input ranges shifted just enough to pull from incomplete data. Date filters widened to include a known outage window. Nothing that screamed tampering, just subtle enough to look like negligence. And the kicker? The formatting timestamps showed the file had been saved late Thursday night. After I logged off, I checked the version history in SharePoint. There it was, a save at 9:47 p.m. My name wasn't on it. Dana's was. I stared at that line longer than I'd like to admit. Part of me wanted to march straight to HR, printout in hand. But another part, the part that had survived corporate life this long, knew better. One log entry wasn't proof. It was a breadcrumb, and if I made noise too early, it would disappear. So I stayed quiet. On Monday, I rebuilt the numbers from scratch in a separate local file, then pasted the final values into the shared sheet so the formulas couldn't be accidentally adjusted again. Dinah reviewed it, nodded, and said, "Looks good now." No mention of before. The client call went fine. Crisis averted. And just like that, everyone moved on. Everyone except me. Because once you realize someone is willing to quietly sabotage you and smile while doing it, you stop assuming anything is accidental. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. Small things. A chart label changed, a total off by a few points. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but enough to erode trust. Each time, Dana would catch it and loop in my manager, positioning herself as the safety net. I watched my reputation bend under the weight of those moments. Not break, bend. And that's worse, because bent things don't get fixed, they get replaced. One evening, alone in the office, I opened the file history again and scrolled back further than before. Past weeks, past projects. I started exporting logs, saving timestamps, mapping edits against meeting schedules. A pattern emerged. Dana only edited files tied to high visibility work, only late at night, only mine. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't about me failing. This was about her making sure I never succeeded. That night, I stopped trying to fix the spreadsheet. I started preparing to end the game. By the third week, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Anger makes you sloppy. It makes you confront people too early. Say things you can't take back. Tip your hand. What I felt instead was that quiet, narrowing clarity you get when a puzzle finally shows its edges. Dana wasn't reckless. She was systematic, and that meant there would be rules. I stopped touching the shared file directly. Instead, I built everything locally. New spreadsheets, clean copies, same structure, same formulas, but stored on my machine, time-stamped, and backed up automatically. Every morning, I'd open the shared file and compare it against my version cell by cell. It wasn't paranoia. It was verification. The next time something changed, I caught it within minutes. A total on a slide summary shifted by 2.3%. Just enough to raise an eyebrow. I checked my local file. No change. I checked the version history. Edited by Dana, 8:12 a.m. That mattered, because she'd been in a meeting with my manager at AITA. I remembered because I'd been invited and told, last minute, that my attendance wasn't necessary. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just editing files. She was shaping a narrative in real time, planting tiny inconsistencies, then positioning herself as the one who noticed them. I wasn't being framed in one big move. I was being slowly rewritten. I documented everything, screenshots of version history, exports of audit logs, copies of my local files with creation and modification times. I even started keeping a simple timeline in a text document. Date, project, change, who benefited. It was boring work, meticulous, exactly the kind of work Dana never did. Still, I didn't move, not yet, because proof without context just looks like paranoia. I needed someone neutral, someone with access, someone who didn't care about office politics. That's when I thought of IT. Not IT as in the help desk ticket you file when your monitor dies. Real IT, the infrastructure team that managed SharePoint permissions, backups, and retention policies. The people who could see not just who saved a file, but how it was accessed, from where and under what account context. I didn't march over with accusations. I did what you're supposed to do in a corporate environment. I asked a calm, boring question. I filed a ticket. "Hi," I wrote. "I'm trying to understand how version history works for shared Excel files on SharePoint. Specifically, whether formulas and named ranges are fully tracked and recoverable. This is for audit documentation. No names, no drama." 2 days later, I got a reply from a guy named Mark, senior systems analyst. 15 years with the company. The kind of person who writes incomplete sentences and doesn't use emojis. He explained that, yes, all changes were tracked. More than that, there were nightly backups outside of SharePoint's visible version history. Immutable copies. Read-only. Stored for compliance reasons because of our healthcare clients. "Why?" he asked. I stared at that one word for a long time before replying. "Because I think a file I own was altered in a way that doesn't match my local source," I wrote. "And I need to understand whether an original state can be verified." Mark didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone had shifted. "If you believe there's a data integrity issue," he wrote, "we should look at it together." We scheduled a short call, no invites sent, no calendar noise, just 15 minutes. I shared my screen, showed him my local file, then the shared one, then the version history. I didn't accuse, I just asked questions and let the silence do the work. Mark leaned back in his chair. "This is odd," he said finally. He pulled up something I couldn't see. Back-end logs, I assumed. His eyes moved left to right, fast. "These changes weren't bulk edits," he said. "They're targeted, specific ranges, specific times." He paused. "And the original version? It's still there." My pulse jumped, but I kept my voice steady. "Recoverable?" "Yes," he said, "and more importantly, provable." That was the word I'd been waiting for. I thanked him and ended the call. No celebration, no relief, just resolve. Because now I knew two things for certain. First, I wasn't imagining it. Second, if I moved next, I had to move perfectly. They thought I was quietly fixing mistakes. I wasn't. I was building a record. Everything unraveled on a Tuesday, and it started with a calendar invite I didn't send. At 9:14 a.m., my manager added me to a meeting titled Data Integrity Review. No description. Required attendees. Him, Dana, HR, and someone from IT. Mark. I didn't react. I didn't message anyone. I just stood up, walked to the restroom, and took exactly 30 seconds to breathe. Not to calm down, to focus. Because once this started, there was no rewinding it. When I walked into the room, Dana was already there. She looked relaxed, scrolling her phone, legs crossed. She smiled when she saw me, the same friendly smile she'd worn every time she'd caught one of my mistakes. HR sat at the far end, neutral and unreadable. My manager avoided my eyes. Mark nodded at me once. Just once. The door closed. My manager cleared his throat. "We've had ongoing concerns about reporting accuracy," he said. "IT flagged some irregularities, and we want to clear the air." Dana leaned forward. "I'm really glad we're doing this," she said. "Transparency is important." Mark didn't look at her. He connected his laptop to the screen. What followed wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no gotcha moment. Just facts, laid out in the most devastating way possible. He started with the shared spreadsheet, showed the visible version history everyone already knew about. Then he switched views. "These are back-end access logs," he said. "They show not just saves, but interactions, cell-level modifications, timestamps, account context." Dana's smile froze. Not gone, just paused. Mark highlighted a series of entries. "These edits occurred outside business hours, always between 8:40 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. He clicked again. "Always to files owned by the same user." Another click. always affecting formula references tied to performance metrics. He paused, then said the sentence that changed everything, and they were all performed under Dana's credentials. Silence hit the room like pressure, the uncomfortable kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Dana laughed, too quickly. That doesn't mean anything, she said. I review files all the time. That's part of my role. Mark nodded. Reviewing isn't the issue. He brought up a split-screen view. On the left, my local file, time-stamped and hashed. On the right, the recovered backup from the night before the meeting. An immutable copy, untouched by SharePoint edits. The numbers matched. Perfectly. These backups are generated automatically, Mark said. They can't be altered by end users. This is the original state of the file before the edits. My manager leaned forward now. So the errors were introduced after the fact, Mark finished, deliberately. Dana's face drained of color, but she tried to recover. You're assuming intent, she said. Maybe I was fixing something and made a mistake. Mark didn't argue. He just pulled up the final screen. A timeline, dates, projects, visibility level, outcome. Each time the pattern repeated. High-stakes deliverable, subtle degradation, Dana flagging the issue, Dana positioned as the safeguard. HR finally spoke. Dana, she said calmly, can you explain why these edits were never documented or communicated? Dana opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't think... That's not an answer, HR said. My manager rubbed his temples. He looked tired, older, like someone realizing too late that he'd trusted the wrong person for the wrong reasons. I trusted you, he said quietly. Dana snapped then. I was protecting the team, she said, voice sharp. If he'd done his job right, I wouldn't have had to... There it was. The sentence hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. HR nodded once. Thank you, she said. That's sufficient. Dana was escorted out of the room 10 minutes later. Not dramatically. No security. Just HR and a request to hand over her badge and laptop, pending investigation. As the door closed behind her, my manager turned to me. I owe you an apology, he said. I should have listened. I nodded. Not gracious, not bitter, just done. Mark packed up his laptop. As he passed me, he said quietly, For what it's worth, you handled this the right way. When the room emptied, I sat alone for a moment, staring at the blank screen. The chaos was over, and for the first time in weeks, the silence felt clean. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Dana didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. By Friday, her calendar was gone, her name removed from shared folders, her desk already half cleared by facilities, like she'd never really been there. HR sent a brief email to leadership about a separation following a data integrity investigation. No details, no gossip fuel. Just enough truth to close the loop. People started looking at me differently, not sympathetically, respectfully. The kind of respect that comes when a story circulates without you telling it. When someone else connects the dots and decides, on their own, that you weren't the problem. My manager asked me into his office the following Monday. No closed door this time. No crossed arms. I want to reset how we work, he said. No more shared edit chaos. You'll own your files end to end. Reviews go through read-only copies. I nodded. It wasn't an apology, but it was accountability. In corporate life, that's often the closest thing you get. He hesitated, then added, I also put you in for the senior analyst role. It's overdue. I didn't thank him. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because this wasn't a favor. It was a correction. It followed up with a formal report a week later. It documented everything, access logs, backups, timestamps, methodology. Clean, clinical, unarguable. Mark CC'd me on the final email with a single line at the bottom. Let me know if you ever need verification again. I saved it. Not because I expected to need it, but because I'd learned something important about leverage. The strange thing is, I didn't feel victorious. No rush, no urge to celebrate. What I felt was something steadier, relief. For weeks, I'd been second-guessing myself, replaying meetings in my head, wondering if I really had missed something obvious, wondering if I was, in fact, the problem, and just too proud to admit it. That kind of doubt is corrosive. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And it almost worked. What stopped it wasn't anger or confrontation. It was process, documentation, patience. Dana didn't lose her job because I exposed her. She lost it because her own pattern collapsed under scrutiny. All I did was make sure the truth had somewhere solid to stand. A few coworkers reached out quietly. I always thought something was off, one said. Another admitted Dana had helped them once in a way that didn't feel right, but they hadn't pushed back. Fear makes people small. I don't blame them. I did make one change after all this. I stopped assuming good intentions were enough. Now I write things down. I save versions. I confirm decisions in email. Not because I'm paranoid, but because systems work better than trust when the stakes are high. That's not cynicism. It's maturity. Months later, I ran into Dana's name on LinkedIn. New company, new title, same smile. I closed the tab without clicking. Some lessons aren't yours to teach twice. What stayed with me wasn't the sabotage, or even the vindication. It was the moment I realized I didn't need to be louder, sharper, or more political to survive. I just needed to be precise, calm, unmovable. They tried to make me fail quietly. Instead, I learned how to stand where failure couldn't reach me, and that was enough.